Hello, great souls. Welcome to our Satsang talk on reflections on Autobiography of a Yogi. Let's take a moment to begin now with a prayer. Heavenly Father, Divine Mother, Friend, Beloved God, Great Masters of Self-Realization, Jesus Christ, Babaji Krishna, Lahiri Mahashaya, Swami Sri Yukteswar, and Paramahansa Yogananda Ji, saints of all religions, friend and guide Swami Kriyananda, we humbly bow to you all. Guide us now in our time together as we study this beautiful book with sacred teachings. Help us to see how these are relevant to our own journey, to collect these treasures, to apply them in our lives, and to share them with all. Om. Peace. Amen. Okay, so this week we're looking at chapter, let's see, I believe it's 6, but I want to make sure. Yes, chapter 6, the Tiger Swami. So as I went through and looked at, what are the treasures in this chapter, there were certain themes that stood out to me. The first, again, is another story where Yogananda speaks of what he calls boyish enthusiasm, and it's this childlike energy. I mean, he was a child. So he heard of this saint, he and his friend heard of this saint who with his bare hands could subdue tigers, Bengal tigers. And that's an extraordinary feat, right, to be able to do that. So this man he could do that, but he had also become a monk. So he was even perhaps more fascinating because of that. So Yogananda tells the story of he and his friend going to visit this man to find out, is it true? And if it's true, how did he do it? And there's all these, sweet little things along the way. So they go to the house, and Yogananda says he piercingly is ringing, knocking on the door. And the servant who comes to get the door is very leisure in his way that he comes to greet the door. And there's a silent rebuke in that, which is, Yogananda said there's an unwritten law in India that truth seekers sincere truth seekers require patience. So the servant, in his slow gait, walking to answer the door, is sending them that rebuke of relax, right? Be quiet. The other message there is that no matter how much clamor outwardly that goes on, how much noise and clamor, the home of a saint, the calmness of that home will be undisturbed. So also part of the patience is that Yogananda and his friend have to wait a while. So they sit there, and it seems like a very long time before they're called into the parlor of the Tiger Swami. And that was actually more the patience part. The first rebuke was this relaxed walk of the servant saying, calm down, basically. So the boys ask the saint about, will you tell us if this is true, and will you tell us how you did this? And very quickly, the saint begins to point out the limitation of physical strength, that bodily strength is not enough to do what he did, that it takes mental vigor to be able to do that. The capacity to apply willpower, and also to hold in the mind this attitude of strength in the face of something as fierce as a tiger. So the Swami says, there are other men as strong as he was physically, but they didn't have mental vigor, that in the face of a tiger, they would run, they would flee. So that's one of the messages that he's sending. But the deeper story is a story of transformation where the Swami himself had a deep realization that he was really on the wrong path and misusing his strength, misusing his power. And karmically, there was going to be a consequence to that. So Yogananda introduces this idea of past lives and karma, and how all of us have tendencies that turn into habits that become manifested in our physical body. So this is definitely a deep teaching of yoga, that everything that we are in this life is a reflection of who we have been. Asha gave a wonderful talk yesterday in Sunday service talking about this, right? I mean, it's a common theme. It's a central theme of yoga teaching, karma and past lives and how it influences us and how to work with that. So the good news of karma and the good news of yoga teaching is who we have been does not have to determine our future. It does reflect in our life this moment, but we can behave differently today, and that is a trajectory towards our future. Yogananda said that when you apply willpower and a strong mind, like with a strong affirmation, you can change in a moment the deepest rooted pattern, so the deepest rooted habit. And certainly the grace of a guru can do that. I mean, ultimately, we're applying ourselves to open up to this grace for that transformation. So it's more than personal effort, but the personal effort is about aligning our energy and our consciousness with the divine. So let me take a sip of water. So in the story, the Swami received, before he was a Swami, okay, that helps. He receives, a saint comes to his father. So I love the fact that his father was meditating out on the veranda and a saint came to him. And you know, there's just these little things that Yogananda inserts in the story, and that is meaningful. Again, in terms of yoga practice and yoga teaching, when we're meditating, we're we draw to us grace. So there's his father meditating, and a saint comes to him and says, you know, and gives him these words of warning for his son, to say, your son has created, you know, he's behaving in a way that is going to bring a backlash to him of negativity. So he'll be hurt and he'll become very ill. The next tiger that he fights. So warn him about this. The other thing the saint adds is that after this, he will change his life completely and embark on a spiritual life. So the father first doesn't tell his son the whole story. He just says, a saint came to me. He told me to warn you about what you're doing and that you shouldn't do it anymore. It's not right to be treating animals in this way. It's not right. So it's violent and it's not right. And the Tiger Swami rebukes his father and is very strong in justifying his behavior. And he says to his father, tigers are merciless. They're beautiful, but they're merciless, and they deserve to be humbled. So, you know, think of me as a master. Think of me as teaching them. So he's very arrogant in his attitude, right? He feels completely justified. This is the right thing to do, and there will be no ill, there should be no ill that comes to me because of it. When I read that, I thought about how easy it is to feel justified in our behavior. I'm reminded of a mentor one time saying to me, I had taken on a lot, and I think it's fitting in this way because the Swami says he was full of pride and arrogance. So when I was younger, I was in college and I had taken on a lot of courses over this particular summer. I wanted to get through faster, and I was trying to make up for, I was in a hurry, is what I'll say. I was in a hurry. So it really was not a balanced way for me to be in school. And some of you know this, I am a recovering alcoholic, recovering addict alcoholic. So I was new in sobriety. I got sober when I was 20. And I'm mentioning that because this mentor, she was a mentor for me in recovery. Balance in my life was a critical issue for maintaining sobriety. It was not, in general, I hear a lot of people talk about balance, and I think in general we agree it's a good idea. It's nice to have balance. Yogananda actually spoke of a balanced life, and he very much spoke of Swami. I'll come back to this, but Swami tells a story of when he was imbalanced with his diet one time. He took on a diet that was too severe, and Yogananda corrected him. He said, well, continue. I don't want to weaken your will, you and your friend, the other monk, with this, but it's not appropriate. And he told Swami to eat 3 meals a day. That was a balanced approach to living. So my mentor, I was feeling challenged with all my classes, but determined to do it, right? I just wanted to garner, and I have a very strong will. So I felt like I can do it. And James and I were new in our relationship. We were dating long distance. I had called him on break from class, and I was having a hard time. So I called him, and he gave me the best pep talk, right? You can do it. And I loved it. I loved his advice. So I divinely happened, I'll say, to go over to my mentor's house after class that day and was kind of retelling her this story that, how are things going is her question, right? Because that's her role in my life. How are you doing? Well, I'm been pretty stressed out about my class load, but I talked with James today, and he gave me some great advice, and I feel like I can do it. I'm gonna tough it out. That's really what I said. And she very quietly, she was washing dishes. I was sitting in her kitchen at the table. And so her back was to me. She wasn't looking at me. And she just had this long pause, which I noticed, right? And then she said, do you think that's a good idea to do that, tough it out? And I got a little defensive and said, yes, I think it's a good idea. I can do it. I could do it. She said, mm-hmm. And then she said, well, what might the cost be to you if it's not a good idea? And I really did not want to hear that question, because I knew where she was going. I could sense where she was leading. And I didn't say anything, right? I was a little defensive. She could feel my energy, right? And then she said, you are a recovering alcoholic, which I didn't want to be reminded of because I didn't like that, right? It was upsetting to me. It was beyond discouraging that was a reality for me. And I can say today, I look back and I understand, I didn't know it at the time, but it was very arrogant of me to be so upset to discover that this physical body has a vulnerability to addiction and alcoholism. It does, right? That's the body I incarnated into. I didn't really have those terms back then either, but I remember at 20, being so upset and dismayed by that information as it came to realization for me, right? As I identified, right? I looked around people who most of which were twice my age in recovery, and they were telling stories of their early, of their early drinking career, right? That was very similar to mine. So, honestly, I was spared decades that they went through, but also, honestly, I didn't have decades to go through. My own soul knew not much time here. You need to stop now or that's it. And that came to me, and I didn't expect to talk about this today, but that came to me in a divine dream. And I understood it. I understood that, wow, I needed to change. And the grace came to me to change shortly after that. But it was hard. It was hard. So here I was a few years in and working with this mentor who was reminding me that one of the cornerstones of 12-step recovery is meditation and prayer, a very strong spiritual life. One of the programs you may know that I co-lead is Yoga and the 12 Steps, and there are a lot of similarities of the spiritual practices. So she was reminding me that the risk of imbalance, if I overdo in one area of my life, things that I need to give energy to could be compromised. And the truth is they would be compromised. It was very likely, right? So she wasn't specifically saying, will you have time to meditate? Will you have time to pray? Will you have time to go to meetings? She wasn't asking specifics. She just asked me, what's the cost if you're not correct about this? I didn't say anything. And she reminded me, you are a recovering alcoholic, and if you take on more than you are ready for right now, you could end up dead. And you could end up dead. And she said, James isn't an alcoholic, so he can do something you can't. I didn't like hearing that either. I did not want to hear that, but I knew it was true. She said he can take on more, and there'll be a cost to him. He might be really physically tired, but he can power through that. A lot, he could do that. And she said, I'm sure it did work for him in school, but I do not advise it for you, is what she said. Right? Now, the other piece to this, and this is truly a practice in spiritual teaching, which Yogananda's talking about in these stories, finding your teacher, how do teachers work with you? The Tiger Swami is telling stories, and he's first talking about being arrogant and prideful and having all of this strength and enjoying having all this strength and misusing it. So, and he got corrected. The story is about him learning the hard way, right? There was a great cost to him. He was given a message of warning and didn't heed it. I was given a message of warning in that moment. I did heed it. I didn't want to, but I understood that her only desire was to really genuinely help me. And the other thing that she said is that James is not your mentor in this, right? And that, boy, was that really important information that for both James and I, for our whole relationship, that I had a mentor for recovery, and that's who I should be asking. Not James, who's a very good, my goodness, he's my best friend, and already then was my best friend. But he could not guide me in this because he didn't have the information to guide me. So that was the other thing I needed to do, was then talk to him about it. And he immediately said, oh, of course, you should listen to her, right? Follow her guidance. Well, this happens in our journey, right? This has been my experience, not just for myself, but with others, that when we are sincere in seeking transformation, spiritual growth, awakening, teachers will come to us. And then it's to us to listen and to evaluate, what are they asking? And what's my response? Where's my space to receive the guidance I'm being given? One of the practices, I don't know if it came out of that particular moment, but I definitely developed it, which was to receive guidance, consider guidance seriously before rejecting it. So however I feel about what someone says to me, certainly a teacher, but honestly, anyone who's offering me feedback, I make room for that. And then I have my own steps based on yoga teaching and spiritual practice to sit with that information and see if it does resonate. What she was saying to me resonated deeply. I had no doubt within me she was speaking truth. And simultaneously, I was aware that I didn't want to hear it. I was very aware of that. And as a good teacher, she wasn't imposing it. She just said, she laid out the truth without looking at me. Her back to me was probably most of the time just calmly saying a few things, just let me sit there. And then after I think she could sense I had taken it in, then she came and sat down at the table with me. And I said, okay, that's what I'll do. I felt so sad about it because it seemed like a big loss, right? Well, this is just going to take forever then, is what I felt. It's like, maybe, was her response, but you'll be here. And, so being able to work with what is part of the journey. So in this story, the Tiger Swami does not heed the counsel. He has, and then he tells how he got lured into a battle with a very fierce tiger. And it's another story, right? So Yogananda tells all these stories with these teachings for us that we can look at them and say, has that ever happened to me? Have I ever been, the Tiger Swami's insulted, right? So there's this prince who insults him and, basically saying, well, I've heard these things about you, but I doubt it's true. And his arrogance and his pride causes him to take the challenge. It's a great lesson in life, right? Did we ever allow ourselves to, and also the prince says, and if you don't accept my challenge, I will smear your reputation. So how the ego can pull us into things. It's to be manipulated, how we can be manipulated, right? To be more centered would be to not react to any of that. It does happen. It's not an easy thing to be challenged in this way. So he takes the challenge, and there's an incredible story of the fight with the tiger. It's incredible that he does survive, and his life is changed. There's a sweet kind of bringing full circle about that saint who came to his father to give the counsel. Later, he realizes that that man was my teacher, right? So, and then in his longing, his sincere longing to have a teacher, the saint comes back to him. And towards the end of the chapter, I want to see if I can read these. The saint says, so he says, I know now that my teacher is the holy man who gave the wise warning. I humbly made this confession to my father. Oh, if only I could find him. My longing was sincere, for one day the saint arrived unheralded. And that's beautiful. Promise that when we are sincere in our longing for truth, the teacher appears. And then he goes on to say, the saint speaks to him, enough of tiger taming. He spoke with calm assurance. Come with me. I will teach you to subdue the beasts of ignorance roaming in the jungles of the human mind. You are used to an audience. Let it be a galaxy of angels entertained by your thrilling mastery of yoga. So this saint is, he has this transformation. He goes with the saint. It's obvious when he's speaking to Yogananda and his friend that he's had the transformation. He's learned how to tame the inner beasts, the inner beasts of the jungle. I love that. Roaming the jungles of the human mind. Then he says, I was initiated into the spiritual path by my saintly guru. He opened my soul doors, rusty and resistant, with long disuse, Hand in hand, we soon set out for my training in the Himalayas. It's such a beautiful, beautiful story. And one filled with a lot of gems for our own journey of looking at how receptive we are. Is there a way in which pride or arrogance or habits from past tendencies are blocking our forward movement on the journey? So I would say, that's what stood out the most to me today, is this, once again, kind of underlying what do true teachers look like, and what is it to, what's a real victory? So in the worldly sense, our culture, our world, what I would call, it's not that I call it that, but in yoga we might call it mass consciousness. The consciousness of the masses is is centered in ego. So physical strength and material success is very celebrated. It's very celebrated. And one of the things the Tiger Swami said is that fame intoxicated him. So it can be so subtle, I want to say. As I said, I in no way thought of myself in my younger years as arrogant. I didn't think of that. But I can see that I was, because I was so resistant to limitations. I felt like, well, if I accept that limitation of my physical body or my physiology, then that means that's who I am. I really didn't understand the soul nature, my own soul nature. I would say that I had a sense of it, but I didn't recognize what yoga teaches, that that's my identity. Yogananda famously said in one of his talks when he was with a group, "When I look at you, all I see is light. If you could only see yourself as you really are, which is this inner divine light, that's our soul nature." So a central theme in yoga is the shedding of the false identity. Anything that's feeling like a loss in the material realm is quite often associated with not our true identity, because we can't lose anything. That's the truth. Even our physical body, when that passes, we don't pass, we go on. And that's so much of the yoga journey, is understanding that, finding security in that inner realm of reality. There's a beautiful story I'll finish with. I've been reading Transitioning in Grace. It's a book by Nalini Garber, I think is how we say Nalini's last name. This is through Crystal Clarity, about yogis dying and how they do it, and how the teachings of yoga allow people to transition from the physical realm with grace. And in the story I was reading last night about Tim Kretzmann, there's a beautiful poem his son wrote. And in the poem, it starts with genuine grief at the loss of his father. And then he intuits and feels his father speaking to him and saying, "There is no loss. I haven't gone anywhere." Right? We still are in relationship with one another. And go within, go within. As you find that inner abode, you will feel and taste the freedom of eternity. And that's where I will meet you again, eventually. And it's very comforting and very beautiful. So that's the message always of the teachings. And that's what I found in chapter 6 today. So just wishing you a beautiful week, and thanks for being here today. Many blessings, great souls.